We're joined now by Kris Hartley from Melbourne. He's a public policy lecturer at the University of Melbourne School of Social and Political Sciences. Kris, that was a fascinating story. Let's explore nature-based solutions to water challenges. They have 16 of these sponge cities. What do you make of this idea?
Well, Mike, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me on. I like to look at this sponge city idea, which is very interesting, as kind of the crux of the debate between looking at water as a friend or as an enemy. And I think that if you look at the engineering solutions that have typically been used, such as piping that collect and concentrate water and channel it out into larger bodies of water, that's really looking at water as the enemy. Whereas these types of sponge city solutions are looking at water more in an inviting kind of way, to absorb that water, not necessarily to channel it out as quickly as possible, but to bring it into the environment, to bring it into the aquifers and to the groundwater tables. And that, of course, has the added effect of reducing the amount of surface level runoff there is in many of these cities that are overbuilt and very dense.
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, Los Angeles. Listening to this story, I was thinking of what a concrete jungle that is, and I can remember these huge downpours, and there's just so much concrete, it can't be absorbed quickly. What are some of the other water conservation projects going on in China that have caught your eye? What do you see as interesting?
Well, for instance, in the Pudong area, there's a new project called Lingang. And this is a new town that is actually being designed from scratch with these principles in mind. And this is very typical of the way China often approaches new types of solutions to problems. There will be these sort of areas of experimentation, and there will be observation, and then a scaling up of these types of projects if they're successful. One example of this, of course, is the permeable pavement idea that we heard in the previous segment. Also the notion of rooftop gardens, which are proliferating across the city of Shanghai and other cities as well, and also the concept of bioswales, which are sort of areas of concentrated greenery that are dotted around the landscape to help absorb a lot of this runoff. So I believe that China is actually making some very interesting and significant steps in addition to its investments into this type of technology, and would expect that the rest of the world would have something to learn from this eventually.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, but you know, one of the things that's really interesting about China, as you know, it's such a huge country, so diverse. There are so many issues related to water shortages, water pollution. What more do you think can be done to help with some of these pressing issues?
Well, water, of course, is a very large issue in China, not just in terms of flooding, but also in terms of water scarcity. And some of the viewers may know about the massive water transfer project that is transferring water to some of the more arid regions of the north. So China has invested significantly in this, but we have to keep in mind as well that China is also focusing on environmental quality. Just recently, there's evidence that, for instance, air pollution has improved. So it's my opinion that China is starting to recognize some of its environmental problems, and one of those is groundwater pollution. So we've written a bit about groundwater pollution in areas of mainland China, and as the water tables reduce, the concentration of pollutants goes up. So to draw upon those water tables into the regular potable water system is becoming increasingly risky. So that is another thing that could be an advantage of this this sponge cities project, is that as more water is absorbed into the ground, it dilutes some of those pollutants and thereby improves the overall quality of the groundwater.
Kris Hartley joining us from Australia. Thanks so much.